So I just said, it, I'll do it myself. So I quit practicing law, built this huge network, and I mean huge. And at the end of the year, I made about $10,000. And I thought, guess I have to go back to practicing law.
It's not enough to pay for your own funeral, and it's not enough to live by either.
I was so discouraged because I could get no one interested in what I was doing. The guy who runs Podfest Expo was there. He put his arm around me. He goes, Tommy, you just keep doing what you're doing. It's all going to work out. And he was right. When they shut the country down, I got a call from every product provider in the compliance space. I had the incredible anomaly of I had people with money and nowhere to spend it, except with me. And so my little world blew up, 120,000 downloads in the month of June to 250,000 by August. The major lesson I learned from that was when the universe closes one door, it opens another. Well, what I didn't fully appreciate was you have to have the courage to walk through that door.
Welcome to The Shift for Leaders, where we talk about leadership and business transformations. And these stories that we talk about are based on real stories with real failures, with real wins, and valuable insights from those journeys. Now, today I have Tom Fox on the show. Hey, Tom.
Hey, from the Hill Country.
Hey. And Tom, you are virtually everywhere. Now, I see you on the C-Suite Network, and you've had me on one of your many podcasts called the Compliance Podcast, and you've authored the Compliance Handbook. This is not a new book. This is already in the second edition, which signals to me this is a mature version that, has already had some popularity. I'm excited to have you on my show because I really want to hear about what got you into the world of compliance, principles by which you make business decisions and by which you lead. So welcome to the show.
Thank you. I'm absolutely thrilled to be here with you today, Corinna.
Yeah. So tell me then about the Agora Awards. Tell me a little bit about it.
Sure. So I wanted to create an award for podcasting and podcasters. Agora in ancient Greece was a marketplace. It was a marketplace of ideas. And that's what I really wanted to celebrate with the Agora Awards. Last year was the first year I'd given the award, and I gave it to two women who, in my mind, through the podcast format, literally have changed the world. And they are in compliance. They came to me about 8 years ago and said, you need more diversity in your podcast network. And I said, you're right. When are you starting your podcast? And they said, no, that's not what we meant. And I said, oh, yes, it is. So they started a podcast, and they did several things around that podcast. They created a LinkedIn group around the podcast to help promote the podcast. And the podcast and the group was called Great Women in Compliance. They created an acronym out of that called GWIC. So everybody calls them the GWIC girls. And everybody knows what a GWIC is, Great Women in Compliance. And they literally built, first of all, there was no forum for women in compliance at that time. There was no group. So they started this group, and it quickly became a place where women got together and talked about, issues for women in compliance. Now it didn't exclude men, and you could be a friend of GWIC, which I am, but it was so powerful that the first year after the pandemic, there was a year we had conferences again. There was a panel on Great Women in Compliance. The next year, that panel was so popular, they did a 3-hour workshop on women, basically women helping women in compliance. Well, the third year, they had started an entire 2-day conference. And so literally from one idea that my podcast network needed diversity, these two women created something that there's now an annual conference over. And I'm so proud of them and was so proud to give them the first one. The second one, though, and that obviously with that bar, it's very high. And the second one, though, it's a business podcast out of Hong Kong. And they started it for the following reason, Corinna. Most of the news we get in America about Hong Kong is more politically focused. Demonstrations, or the Chinese government has done this or done that. And we don't get business news. Well, Hong Kong is still a major financial player in the Asia Pacific market. And they wanted to start their podcast to simply say, hey, we're still here doing business. And I just thought, what a brilliant idea. Now, they frame that around business and compliance and other issues, and I've been on their podcast a couple of times, but they're just using the podcast format to say, Hong Kong is still here. It's a player. We're still doing business the way we've done business for 100 years. So when you can have that kind of effect, I think that's worth celebrating. And both the Gwick girls, if I can call them that, and I do call them that, and now the Regulatory Ramblings podcast won Agora Award. So anyway, I was very proud to create the award. I'm even more proud of those who won it. And so I know I
Well,
went on
you've
a long
changed the
time.
world a little bit, it sounds.
Maybe. I hope so.
Yeah, by inspiring that. You know, it's interesting. I started my podcast this year, and I've been thinking, I've just for many years, I thought, "Ugh, podcasting has probably already reached its peak. Who wants to listen extensively to podcasts?" Because I always that might be a mistake that I'm making, and I'm sure it is from a business perspective and from a strong decision making perspective. I think it's a fallacy to go by your own taste, to make assumptions, to extrapolate from there and think, oh, nobody's going to do this, right? You take the data points, and the data tell us that podcasts are still growing. There's an audience for that. People love podcasts. Leads me to the question here, really. When I'm listening to you about these two podcasts that became so successful, it sounds to me like one of the pillars of their success was you nudged them. Yes, there was somebody saying there is a demand for that, but then also identifying a very unique niche to say, there is a spot that nobody's covering, and we're going to do it. Right? Like the Hong Kong example is prime for that. But
So absolutely. And I'm a big believer in niche, as you can tell by having a compliance focused podcast network. And you get to tell these really narrow, fun stories. But let me go back to something you said a little bit earlier and push back just a little bit. You said we should look at the data, but I think it's equally important to overlay you and your interest and your perspective with the data, because obviously you and I are very different. We have very different perspectives. My perspective is not your perspective. And when you give your perspective, you're giving someone like me valuable information. Now, I can accept it, I can incorporate it. Who knows? I may have now two cameras going forward on a podcast just from this recording alone. But the you part of the podcast, I think, is equally important to the data saying, there's an opportunity or a need for this. So the you part, the Corinna part, is what makes your podcast so successful.
mm, I like that. That's a great point. So that leads me to the next thing, your compliance podcast. And so what did initially lead you to do that? Now you're an attorney, you care about compliance. I work with an MSP. I think I introduced you recently, who's also very much into compliance. And I said, hey, you guys should connect. You come from different angles. One comes from the tech angle. And so, yeah, tell me a little bit more.
So I started podcasting in 2012, and at that point, it was a natural extension of blogging. And I started blogging for marketing. And I went out on my own in 2010 to start a compliance consulting practice. My previous job my company had been sold and my job went away. And so I decided I was laid up from a bad accident. And only time I left the house was to get physical therapy. And so I started exploring social media. Twitter, LinkedIn were the big tools back then. And then I'd always written a lot of articles as a lawyer. So blogging was pretty easy and straightforward for me once I learned how to quit writing like a lawyer and write like a normal person. So I started blogging. I did that for a couple of years, and then podcasting was sort of the next thing. I'd started that. 2017, I got the bright idea. We need a network for compliance podcasts. And so there were three major players in the compliance space, trade associations, et cetera. One for-profit, two nonprofits. I went to all three and I said, look, let's form a joint venture or partnership for compliance podcasts. It will not take away from anything you're doing now, and we'll put all our podcasts together and will be a one-stop resource for compliance. And not that I would ever suggest anything anti-competitive. We'll corner the market on all advertising. And I could get no interest. They were like, "What's a podcast?" So I just said, "Bleep it, I'll do it myself." And so I did. And I founded the network, and it putzed along for a while. And then I knew back then the key metric was 30,000 downloads. If you have 30,000 downloads a month, you could get real advertising dollars. I knew I was never going to have a 30,000 download compliance podcast, but I thought, well, maybe I can have 10 podcasts at 3,000. So that was really what led me to think about the network. Uh, so in 2019, I decided I either had to commit to this full time or I had to move it to hobby status. So I quit practicing law, bought all the cool toys you see, built this huge network, and I mean huge network. And at the end of the year, I'd made about $10,000. And I thought, well, that was interesting. Guess I have to go back to practicing law. And so I did until March 15th of 2020 when they shut the country down. And what happened was starting about May 15, I got a call from every product provider in the compliance space with the same question. How long to get access to your network? Because up until the pandemic, all marketing and compliance was done personally. Trade shows, conferences, breakfast roundtables, those sorts of things, dinners. And nobody had an online presence except me because I was big into the power of social media. So I had the incredible anomaly of I had people with money and nowhere to spend it except with me. And so my little world blew up. I went from, I think it was 120,000 downloads the month of June that year for all of the podcasts in my network to 250,000 by August. And so since that time, I've just either tried to ride that tiger or consolidate the explosion of growth I had in my network. So one of my favorite sayings is when preparation meets opportunity, luck occurs. And that's exactly what happened to me. If I hadn't done all that work in 2019 and spent all the money I did, I don't know if I could have done it, but I don't have to answer that question.
It gives me courage. There's some things that I have cooking on several burners where people have said, no, don't do this. You need to be single-minded, single focus. And I go, no, bullshit. Sorry. All these people, I watch Shark Tank and these people go like, oh, are you fully invested in this? Is this the only business you have? I'm like, oh, look at you yapping. Like, you invest in like 12 different businesses in one day. Here you are, right? Of course you want the person that's like single-mindedly invested because it gives you higher control and greater confidence. But um, like to the point of preparation, you don't want to miss an opportunity. It tells me also that you pivoted. So one could think, yeah, he's an attorney and being a compliance guy, but what you really are is a marketer.
I used to say I was a lawyer who did podcasts, but I think maybe I'm a podcaster who occasionally practices law.
Yeah, sounds like it. So you put up your experiments, you threw all your weight behind it, and then you get 10,000. Great. It's not enough to pay for your own funeral, and it's not enough to live by either, right?
Yeah, I was pretty discouraged after that year, but I don't know if you've ever been to Podfest Expo, but there are two major podcast conferences in America. One's called Podcast Movement. The second's called Podfest Expo. And I was at Podcast Movement in 2019, and I was so discouraged because I could get no one interested in what I was doing. And the guy who runs Podfest Expo was there, and his name is Chris. And I went to tell him goodbye. I was leaving the conference, and he put his arm around me. And he's one of two people, in addition to my mother, who calls me Tommy. He goes, Tommy, you just keep doing what you're doing. It's all going to work out. And he was right.
Yeah. What do you say? Like, it's that persistence that you need. And I think anybody listening to this here, and some people are talking about business leadership, one of the key principles, and I think I've probably repeated that quote multiple times, overnight success is made over 10 years.
Absolutely.
If you're not in with a little bit of longevity, if you can't hold your breath for longer than 3 seconds in business, you're out, right? you out. And that resilience is so important. 2 weeks ago, I was talking to Jeff Kalbars, who had been in a room. He had almost won a client, was in a $20 million room, as he called it, in the big room. And for 3 months, he's talking to this potential client and investing in equipment, right? He's in the home care service industry. He goes, and I'm investing into this equipment. And here this guy, goes, oh, let me think about it. He walks out of the room, and the next thing he knows, that following week, the guy signed with another company. He goes, I already have invested so much money. What am I going to do now? And it taught him a lesson. And I think, if I hear you talk, to me, it just says, if you walk away from that just giving up, you have missed the opportunity to learn a lesson.
So I told you when I started my consulting practice, I was laid up from a bad accident. Well, the major lesson I learned from that was I've always known that when the universe closes one door, it opens another. Well, what I didn't fully appreciate was you have to have the courage to walk through that door. So that's what I did when I started my consulting practice. I saw this opportunity because back then there were very few lawyers in that world, and I knew how to do it and I enjoyed doing it. So, um, just have the courage to walk through that door because the universe will open up something for you.
Just have to do something with it. Like, I kept telling a friend this week, who said, "Oh, market is terrible, AI, and all these layoffs and economy." And I said, fear doesn't sow seeds. Fear doesn't grow. Like, if you live in that and you just shrink back, there's nothing that will come from it. If you want to see something grow from this, if you want any way forward, you have to think about, how am I going to invest myself? What's my next step? Which actually leads me to a question for you. Like, where are the big challenges and the big opportunities in compliance right now?
Well, the big challenges are that under this administration, there's been a significant change in focus. And the flavor of compliance I did was anti corruption, anti bribery. Well, this administration is more concerned about things like tariffs, like export controls, like sanctions. Um, and so initially, many people thought, well, this will be the end of anti corruption compliance. Well, it turns out that wasn't true at all. But what I've tried to do, and I wrote a book about this in March of this year, is we're at an inflection point because of technological advances, specifically AI, and that I'm a lawyer by professional background. And the type of compliance officer that I was and that many of my colleagues are is legal based, legally trained. We can read and write very well. In my case, I cannot add 2 plus 2 without a calculator, and that has to change. And you must be more business focused, you must be more technologically adept, and you must be able to use AI to do compliance literally at the speed of business. One of the major complaints about compliance when I started in this field was compliance was Dr. No from the land of no or the land of business non-development. And compliance never said yes to anything. Well, hopefully we've disabused people of that. But how do we now move from, oh, it's going to take 4 weeks for me to approve that company to do business with to, I'll get back to you this afternoon? Because that's how fast you have to pivot in business. And in the world I play in, literally in under this administration, the rules could change this afternoon. And that would not be unusual. And whether you call that chaos or whether you call that just being dynamic, it really doesn't matter. That's the reality we live in. And so compliance has to be ready to move at that speed. How are you going to do that? You're going to use AI. So I wrote a book about compliance officers fully embracing AI, and I've tried to advocate that literally since for this year, and I'm trying to help be a part of that dialogue on we all need to embrace AI.
Yeah, I agree. And then how we use AI also, like, not just it doesn't replace us. When I work with a lot of senior executives, and then the question is, when are they coming for my job? So far, it's the jobs that are more easily replaceable, and then they're thinking, when is it me? Well, you are the decision maker. AI is not capable of making sound decisions because it just spits out whatever you put in, and it makes sometimes very, like, very bad decisions. And so, um, think about how AI becomes your coworker, how it supports things that you need to do, and don't give away things that reduce your capability. So, that being said, like you said, like, I can't do 2 plus 2 without a calculator, but then you still train yourself so that you can do some things that you need to do that are core to your function. So I'm not going to give away to AI what I need to retain as a strong skill that I don't think AI does well. Creativity is one of those things, or like proper reasoning skills, or the ability to express myself. I can use AI to make things easier. For example, if everybody does this, I know it because I've had a friend who thought I didn't realize that he just sent me an AI text message back. I'm like, dude, I know that you don't sound like this normally. So please, M dashes aside, but you don't sound like that. And this is just an awful response. Like you just lost all soul in this conversation. But so use AI to maybe say, okay, how can I draft this post faster? Like a document that you need to put up, right? To give it structure. All of those things are great. Maybe, and that's my strong recommendation. Go in and see what did this thing do that I actually liked that sounded better than what I would have thrown up, and memorize that. What is that made it better? Use it to teach you to become better, because then it doesn't replace you. It just makes you stronger, right? There's some things that I can't replace. Yeah.
Couldn't have said it better.
Thank you. um, Brings me back to one point. So you mentioned this book. So I saw the handbook that you wrote, but this is a new book. Is a different one.
It's a different one. It's called Upping Your Game, and I don't seem to have a copy here on my desk.
Okay. Well, we're gonna put a link in the description box. Yeah. So who needs to read it first?
So anyone involved in risk management, that can be a compliance officer, it can be an internal auditor, it can be a chief technology officer, it can be a chief information security officer, it can be someone who does investigations, it can be someone who does training, because I talk about all of those topics in my book. So it's broken down to sort of three parts. One is what is right now, what can AI do for these functions? Training, investigations, culture, risk assessments, etc. Number two, what lessons uh, does the compliance officer need to apply to AI? Exactly what you were talking about in terms of the oversight and governance. But number three is I went back and looked at business case studies where companies had used AI to create something. Now, they didn't call it AI because I found examples of literally 10 years ago. And what they were doing is it was just basically advanced data analytics. They put together, or took a large data set and they analyzed it and they kept asking questions and kept asking questions till they got an answer. And so I found some great examples of how AI had been used. Once again, they just didn't call it that. And so, but the point was, one, it's been done before, but two, for instance, Citibank did this massive program around their money laundering obligations or anti-money laundering obligations. I never got the full cost tied down, but it was hundreds of millions, if not billions, to do. That same technology is available today for about $25,000. Well, so if you're a $5 million company and you want to have the best money laundering, if you're doing business in Texas and you have to look at Mexico in a different way because of the Trump administration's changing the designation of drug cartels to foreign terrorist organizations. That same tool is available to you for $25,000. And you can fulfill your obligations, but it'll make your company run better. So the cost of entry to use the tools has dropped. I don't even say exponentially, whatever beyond exponentially is. And that's the real turning. That's why I think we're at a true inflection point in compliance. The tools are available and now they're cost effective.
Yeah, and then I think the trick is now not how do I find the best tools, is how do I take advantage of this? How am I gonna put this to work? Because like, I keep realizing when I think back who I went to college with, everybody went and all of us went to one school at one point and we graduated from it. Yet what we do with it is very different. You have so many different angles that you hit. Who is the person that you feel like needs to connect with you the most? What challenge are they facing right now? What comes to their minds? What role are they playing?
No one's ever asked me that. Well done. Uh, the person that needs to connect with me most is the person who has a great idea, but they haven't been able to implement it. Because what I will tell them is, it's not that the world is your oyster, but you can literally create anything you want now. And I live in a ranch near a town of 20,000 people, and I started an AI club in that town. And I tell people, you can have a worldwide business from Kerrville, Texas. You just have to have an idea that works. And whether that's a podcast network, whether it's a piece of software, whether it's a service. When way back when I started my consulting practice in 2010 and I never left the house, I built a worldwide consulting practice literally out of my bedroom. The only mistake I made in 2010 was not trademarking the phrase working from home, because if I had, I'd be very rich and very retired now. But I remember I was about 6 months into that, and someone from London called me, and I was living in Houston at the time. They said, "Tell me about all of your clients in Houston." And I thought about it a minute, and I said, "I don't have any clients in Houston. They're all international." And so you can create an entire business, worldwide business from your home. And so I just try to tell people you can do whatever you want, but do what you love. I obviously love compliance. I love podcasting. And I get to do that all day long.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I would say beyond doing what you love, do what you're really passionate about because when the going gets hard, you need to have enough steam to keep going. Mhm. Well, thank you so much for coming on my show. I know this is not going to be the last time you're on my show because
I hope not.
no, 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 not by a long shot. And so, thank you for being here. Of course, we'll drop all the links in the description box below. So, thank you. Please come back.
I'd love to do so, Corinna. Thank you for inviting me.